Hello, and welcome back to another live session on the Let's Talk Near Death podcast. Kirsty Salisbury here. I am joined today by Sheryl Gottschall, who's based in Brisbane. Sheryl has the most amazing bird sounds behind her. So we were just chatting about that. Sheryl, huge warm welcome. It is fabulous to have you here.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
I'm super excited by our conversation today because it's going to branch into some of those bigger topics. I get emails and questions around the paranormal, around UFOs, around all sorts of different topics. So, afterlife discussions, things like that. So I'm excited that we've created a space to be having some of these topics which are on the outskirts of the near-death experience itself. Yeah. If you have just joined us, you are very welcome here. Thank you for joining us. You are welcome to leave messages. We've got hello from Lorianne. So hello in Oregon. You're welcome to leave your comments in the comments field. You can pop in your questions for Sheryl in there. Hello, Alan. Greetings to you as well. You can leave your comments in there, your questions, your thoughts. This time today is all about answering your questions and understanding what it is that you want to know. So this is your chance to interact live with both myself and with Sheryl. Sheryl's the expert in these topics and these areas, and I know that we're going to have some amazing conversation. I also just want to point out that if you are not receiving updates and you want to be reminded when we go live, you need to subscribe for the newsletter. You can either do that by emailing me and I'll add you to the list, or you can pop on over to the subscribe button. Hello, Miriam. Wonderful. Indiana is where you are. Wonderful to see you there. So I'm going to do a little introduction for Sheryl. Bear with me. Oh, hello, Shera. Love your interview. Oh, thank you. Wonderful to have you here. Don't forget, as we're listening, pop your questions in there for Sheryl. This is a true Q&A session. Sheryl will share a little bit about her own near-death experience as well. But I'm going to start off by introducing Sheryl a little bit better. So Sheryl has had many paranormal experiences, including a near-death experience, that have continued to propel her exploration into the paranormal. She works as a holistic therapist, offering past life regressions, art therapy, Reiki, and shamanic healing, plus other training in Reiki and shamanism through her wellbeing practice at the Body Light Center. She is a public speaker and presenter and formerly a regular guest. Gosh, I'm getting my words mixed up again. Formerly a regular weekly guest on the Spooky Action radio show and past co-host of the Strange Encounters radio show. So I can tell, Sheryl, already by that introduction, we have got some amazing conversation to happen today. If you have your questions, let us know. But Sheryl, are you happy to go back? I know we've just released our interview with you where you did chat a little bit about your near-death experience. You had a distressing near-death experience. Yes, are you happy to just go back through that and share what happened there for the people that maybe haven't been able to pick up that episode already?
Yeah, sure. I had been unwell for 10 years, had a chronic illness, and during that 10-year period, I had 3 years of acute illness. And like many people who have chronic illness for a long time, you try the alternative methods and the traditional methods. And when they're not working, in desperation, you go to the hands-on healers. Which was my last-ditch attempt at trying to find healing. And I did that one day, and I came home. A friend took me there, came home, and I laid down on the couch. The friend left because my husband was coming home within 10 minutes. And so I was in the house by myself, and I saw this strange shape like an ice cream cone on its side, with the small end coming out of the lounge room wall and the larger end coming across into the middle of the living area, and then tipping up like this, becoming horizontal. And it was about 6 feet in diameter, and it was spinning, and I could see it. I could see that happening, but I could also see the living room too. So I could see two things from different realities happening at the same time. And that's not uncommon for people who have, these types of experiences. Anyway, I could feel a strong gravitational pull coming from this spinning vortex, which had opened up in the middle of my living room. and I split off from my body. And the part of me that was, before this, sorry, I had been laying on the lounge chair, and as my heart rate was getting lower and lower and slower, I had a like an energy leak had sprung out of the inside of my elbow. And so every time my heart beat from then on, this energy would sort of spurt out. It wasn't anything physical. It was non-physical, but it would be spurting out at the same time. And I've since discovered you have a chakra on the inside of your elbow as well as one on the outside. So anyway, so I'd split off from my body, and my non-physical self is clutching, on the back of the on the lounge chair, not wanting to be sucked into this because I had a really strong sense of malevolence. And that wasn't the first time I'd had that a feeling of malevolence. I knew that whatever was sucking me in there wasn't good. And if I allowed myself to be drawn into it, I would not be coming back. And I was pretty terrified, actually. And anyway, that went on for quite some time. I can't tell you exactly how long. I mean, to me, it seemed like an eternity. It was probably like 30 seconds or more, but it just seemed, it's just a long time when you're terrified,
I'll say.
Yeah. You're just like, Anyway, and then this ticker tape went through my head, this long stream of like a ribbon went through my head, and my daughter's name was on that. And as soon as I saw that or recognized it, it all just stopped. It just completely disappeared. And I don't know why that happened. It was very strange, but it was a very distressing, traumatizing, upsetting, deeply disturbing experience. I mean, I never got drawn into this thing that looked like a tunnel and had the full-blown meet the spirit bearing and all that sort of stuff, because that wasn't what I felt was waiting for me on the other side there. So that was why I was desperate not to want to be drawn into it.
Sounds terrifying. It really does.
Mm.
Yeah. And the elbow, can you just expand on that? You said that we have the chakra on the outside and the inside of the elbow. I've not heard about that. Can you expand on that?
Well, look, I don't know a lot. I mean, I've had an interest in chakras, but I really, focused on the 7 to 10 chakra system. But so I don't know a lot about where all the other chakras are in the body, but I do know that we've got about 200 all over the body, where we seem to, where energy comes in and goes out, comes in and goes out. So we're always being fed with the, I guess, the universal energy, the chi, the prana, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, interesting, because I've heard of quite a few people saying in experiences they do feel like they're losing energy. It's spurting out, but I've never heard it described quite like how you've just worded it. And that's interesting.
And linked with the heartbeat too. That's the interesting thing, So as my heart is beating, the energy is spurting out. And of course, it got slower and slower as my heartbeat went very low.
Well, it's like the pulse, isn't it? When our pulse goes, and you see in the movie, well, I think you see in the movies where, yeah. Anyway, we'll change topic because I get a bit lightheaded when I talk about blood and things like that. Really interesting. If I looked a bit distracted, my cat just came in. My cat, the door was locked, never comes in. And I was like, oh, isn't that interesting? He never comes in. He jumped up on my knee. I pushed him off. He jumped back up. So, yeah, I just get excited because I think they tap into when we're having these interesting conversations. Okay, so we have got a couple of questions coming in. I'm just going to run through. There's a few people here. Hi, Patrick. Good to see you here. We are going to talk all about paranormal. We're going to talk about UFOs. We're going to talk about afterlife, communication, discussions, all these types of things. Lorianne has jumped in with a very interesting question, and I love this. She says it's an odd question. On the other side, do you have an opportunity to cook, bake food? I think of all the chefs in the world and wonder if they miss out when they cross over, or if they can cook for fun. I'm going to start this lighthearted question because I love it.
That is a fun question. I wouldn't know, because as far as I'm concerned, I haven't actually been on the other side, because I was, very much concerned about going there in this situation. I'm not really sure. I've read a lot of reports of people's NDEs, and I don't think I've ever heard about any of them cooking.
Yeah, it's funny though, because it makes sense because
It
if
does.
we are able to continue what we love, I mean, for me, cooking is really just, I need to feed the family. We're going to do it for a meeting a need, I suppose. But if
Mm,
that's your passion, if that's what
mm,
you love to do and how you love to spend your time, it makes sense to me that we could be able to do that. We could be able to do anything it is that we enjoy here, we could
mm.
do there.
Yeah, I'd like
Yeah.
to take that question a bit further if I could.
Yeah,
In,
absolutely.
in that, I do think that what we are passionate about in this life and what we strive for, what our aspirations are, I think they become the seeds for the next life. So I think we take that with us when we go on somewhere else. I don't know if we actually keep those sorts of worldly behaviours going on the other side. I don't really know, but like I said, I've read a lot of reports from people. I've heard a few reports too, um, and they haven't talked about continuing worldly things. They've talked about what they're learning as an individual, what's important, reflecting on their life, those sorts of things, and planning for the next one. Those are the sorts of things that I hear from people.
Mm. Interesting. And because we definitely carry things across lifetimes, don't we? Whether
Mm,
that's positive things or not so positive things. So I don't see why we wouldn't carry over dreams and things that we enjoy to do,
mm.
hobbies and the like. Yeah. Okay. So that's a wonderful question. Thank you, Lorianne. I love that. It suits you so well now that I know you're a little bit better as well, Lorianne. If you have your questions, jump them in there. Okay, we've got AJ. Yay, I made it. Great to see you here. Hi, Nico. Good to see you back. Lorianne just replied, I sew, so I hope I can see ethereal clothing on the other side. That's really cool. I like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. So, Sheryl, you've got your group Afterlife Discussions, which I encourage everybody to go and check out. That's on Facebook, Afterlife Discussions. What are some of the topics that come up again and again within those discussion groups?
Oh, wow. Things that people, I guess, it's funny when people are together. There are different levels, of course. So there's some people who are still wondering, is it actually true that that there is life after death, or is reincarnation real? And, can you actually communicate with the dead, and they want to hear other people's stories about that. So we explore the evidence for those sorts of things in more formal presentations that I put together, as well as from guest speakers from time to time. And I think there does seem to be a group of people who've had experiences which have convinced them 100% that, yes, something has happened to them. And they say there's no way that could have happened unless, I'm getting communication from the other side, or from my grandfather or my deceased brother, or no one else knew that information, right? So there are that group of people who are convinced that the life after death is real. But there's also a group of people who are still searching and looking and wondering. They've been catapulted onto that path, and they're wondering and trying to find corroboration about that.
Interesting. What sort of, you talk a lot about after death communication and visitations and things like that. I know that that's very personal and that it's very different for everybody who has this type of experience. Are there like common ways, the most common things you see of how this takes place?
Usually spontaneously is one way.
Mm.
Some people use psychomantians. Some people use, scrying with a crystal, with water, I should say, and a crystal ball. Some people just meditate. I think they're the most, but I have to say the most common is spontaneous appearances and visions from people from the other side. And sometimes people go looking for that. And, and I think when you're searching eagerly for something, you have to be, because you want it to be real, don't you? You don't want it to be sort of, I do. I like to have some sort of hard evidence, that something actually is going on here. And I love the stories from Dr. Ian Stevenson, where he studied the children who had memories of past lives from other families, as adults in other families. Or he studied the people who had been born and had memories about past lives, and they were born with birthmarks on their bodies, and those birthmarks related to how they were killed in a past life or injuries that they'd had in a past life. And I find that fascinating stuff. So for me personally, I look more for those types of things that can corroborate the reality of it.
Yeah, exactly. I've heard stories, maybe they were shot in the leg or something, and now they've got a birthmark on the leg. So, of course, I'm gonna have a look on my body. I've got a few little moles and, little marks in places, and I go, "What was that from?" But it's interesting when you hear it crosses over through lifetimes, and we were just talking about that as well, about how we take things through different lifetimes.
Yeah,
When
amazing.
people when they see a past loved one. Oh, sorry, I'm gonna backtrack. You said that sometimes people go looking for it. Do
Mm.
you think if we look for that, because I hear this quite a bit, and I've had people say, "Can you train me? Can you help me? I wanna make connection. I wanna understand." Do you think it's something that we can achieve seems like the wrong word, but if we put enough effort in, that we can tap into the other side and see who we wanna see?
Yes, I think the answer to that is the intensity of your search. And that relates to people in all stages of life. I mean, scientists have that when they're searching for meaning, and it'll come to them. They're searching for an answer to something, and it'll come to them through a dream, some sort of precognitive dream, etc., or just information comes to them. But they're on a really serious quest to understand that. But I think other people in our society, a lesser percent, are just naturally gifted like that. They can do that, and I know a couple of people like that. So, if you can find someone who's got that gift, then go and see them, and they can actually corroborate things for you. I think that's good. But I do think that we can make contact. It's just that the intensity of the quest that will ensure it would happen.
Do you think there's anything we can do to have the right intensity? Are there any actions we can take to maybe enhance the opportunity for that, the possibility that it will happen?
I'm not sure about that. Can we do it? I'd actually say I'm just going to pass on that because I don't know. I actually don't know.
Yeah.
Some people, would probably say, yeah, there are things you can do like meditate and those sorts of things. But these things happen so spontaneously. It's a bit like people who ask me about, how do I see UFOs? Should I go and do this meditation with what they call the CE5 and bring these UFOs in? And I say, well, you can do that. But most of the reports I receive, or all the reports I receive, people see them out of the blue, or they appear to see them out of the blue. They don't go looking for them. It just happens. So maybe we have to consider, why we want that. And I can understand people want to make contact with their loved ones after they've died. I get that. But maybe we need to let them go. It's a bit healthier, that I do think that energetically across the veil that we can actually hold them back if we're trying to make those energetic connections and hold them to this world, which may not be for their benefit, but it's just for ours. And maybe that's not fair.
Wow, that's an interesting concept, that we're holding them back from whatever they need to go and do, I'm assuming. Wow. Wow. 'Cause I know people that are so desperate to get some message, some connection, whatever. They might go and spend time with people who do readings for them. They might try and tap up in, psychics or mediums, or pay for services to try and make that connection. But wow, what if we're holding them back by trying to connect to them? 'Cause we need to let go at some point, don't we? Which is
Yeah.
just really, really
Well,
hard.
yeah, my
Wow.
husband died. My husband died 5 years ago, and we both were very philosophical about death and about, our lives or our existence after we died. And we both felt that we should not hold on to each other after we die because, of course, you're going to have that emotional detachment that takes time to sever. But it should be a healthy amount of time, not years and years, because while we're holding that energy for them, we're holding them I think metaphysically we can hold them in a space. And it holds ourselves in a space too, where he always said to me, I want you to, after I go, I want you to live a long, healthy, productive life. And I wanted the same for him. And he did live a long, healthy, productive life. So, I guess it comes up to the type of relationship you have, whether you're individuals in the relationship, whether you live in each other's pockets, whether you can exist without each other. It's a whole dynamic around the style of relationship you have in this life as to how you can come to an understanding that perhaps it's better to let them go. It's for them to let them go.
Yeah, hard to do.
Very
Did
hard
you ever talk? Yeah. Did you ever talk with your husband about communicating once one of you went?
No. But I did try an experiment with a friend. And because my husband was in aged care before he died, and he was he couldn't communicate anymore, and he'd have his eyes closed. But we went there, and my husband was very open to these ideas so I went there with a recording device and asked him questions while he was laying there, and he couldn't communicate. And we wondered whether the answers might come up in the recording, like an EVP. So we tried that, and I knew he'd be quite happy for us to do that because he was very much about experimentation on all sorts of levels. He was an inventor. So, and we tried that. Nothing actually came up, unfortunately, but we gave it a shot.
Yeah.
Yes. So, people could try those sorts of things. Why not?
Oh, definitely. I actually just finished reading this book about this guy who lives really close to me. I was blown away that I found this book, and then he's in New Zealand and he lives close to me. And he's been throughout the country going into haunted buildings and different places and taking the recorders and the cameras and setting up all the gear and just waiting to see if anything comes through. And I think it's so interesting. And sometimes there were things, and he was very real about it. And he was like, okay, so we could discount this as, something there. And he could give it an actual reason as to why it happened. But there were a couple in there, and I'm like, hang on a minute. You can't actually justify why that happened, why you picked up the sound, or you got the recording, or you felt something in the room, or whatever it was. And I think if we don't have a go, then we'll never know. So
yeah,
I quite like that you did that.
Yeah.
Very brave, because I would be quite afraid about what I might hear, I think. What if he did talk? What if we could hear something? I get a little bit nervous because I'm always the one going, I want these opportunities. I want to see things and experience things, but not at nighttime, not if it's dark, not if it's raining. And I put all the conditions on it, and then it's never going to happen, is it? Because I've put so many conditions on it. So I've come to the point of, I'd like a dream tonight. Can you talk to me in a dream? And I think that works quite well. Yeah. And I have had some very vivid dreams, very, very vivid. I talked about that in our VIP group just a little while ago, because I go through phases where the dreams are so real and they do have past loved ones in them. And I'm always like, what is that trying to tell me? What are you trying to communicate with me? So it does happen.
I think the other thing we have to mention is that perhaps after our loved ones die and they're having an experience that, many people here don't know what's going on for them because, they're interested. That's why they're here. That's, what's happening after we die. Perhaps they might discover that it is in our best interest that they don't communicate with us, So, because I've had a lot of people say, how come some people have communications, but I don't? I love my mother or I love my brother or whoever it was, and they've never communicated with me. And I think, well, maybe it's in your best interest not to, because it may lock you into that dynamic again.
Maybe, or maybe there's something that we don't need to know quite yet. The answers are unlimited, aren't they? They are. I'm going to go over to some of our comments. Shera, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. I've never had an NDE, but I've had several spiritual experiences. Afterwards, I always think maybe it's all in my head or that I'm crazy. Is that a normal reaction?
Yes.
I think that's pretty normal.
Yes, a lot
Totally.
of people question their experiences. I was really interested to listen to something by Dr. Dean Radin, who was doing, he does experiments on random number generators, where people using their consciousness to change the amount of numbers that will fall down into like a grid, and they try and shift the amount that move from this half of the grid over to this half of the grid. So they get a group of people to do it. Anyway, he's done a whole lot of experiments on a whole lot of things. But I heard him talking about he was trying to find a control group of 13 people who in their entire family had never had a paranormal experience. And he said that was the hardest part of the study that we did, because we couldn't find 13 people who'd never had, no one in their family had ever had a paranormal experience. And after going through many people, they finally did. But I think what happens with people is, for a long time, they will. I think it's quite normal to have these experiences. That's my point. But what happens is people tend to go, "Oh, that's just one of those things. That's just one of those things." And they just push it aside for a while. But it comes to a point where someone has a whole lot of those things, and they go, "Wait a minute. What's going on here?" So, and that might be the realization moment for them, that maybe there is something that I need to look into, or that is trying to get my attention, But so I do think that people have experiences. I know, because they tell me, and they question it. They question it because it's not in our culture, is it, to report these types of things?
Yeah, although that is changing, isn't it? It's definitely changing with, the way that things go now. We've got all these online groups and discussion forums and things like that. It's changing. So, yeah, I do think that's a pretty normal reaction, is to go, "Oh, did that really happen?" And I'm guilty of that too. I think also a lot of it is an element of faith. We have to trust and believe it. So I've had experiences where in the moment I'm like, this is absolutely happening. I have to remind myself later on that this is absolutely happening right now. Guarantee you afterwards, and a little bit further down the track, I'm going, did that really happen? So it's about having an element of faith that it did happen, and trusting that the experience was what we thought it was in the time, which is part of this whole conundrum of how do we can't prove anything. Even near-death experiences, we can't really prove them. There's elements of proof which come through, where there's facts which have been, people say things and actually they go, that actually happened, where there has been incidents where things have been verified. But for the majority of these things, we actually can't have any tangible proof. So it's the same whether we're talking a near-death experience, or somebody's come to us from the afterlife, or we've had a dream or a vision, or whatever it might be. I think there's an element of having to blindly believe, unfortunately. I love that. I saw, Sherry, you added to that. You said, my mum visited me in my dreams several times. Once I was upset and I asked her to. She came that night in a dream, hugged me and said she loved me. I've never been able to make myself dream. That's beautiful. That is amazing. I love that. So I ask for dreams all the time because, like I said, I want to have this contact, but not when it's dark, when I'm alone. I put all the criteria on it. Now I'm like, please, can I have a dream tonight? I don't always get them when I ask for them, but I have had some very, very real experiences. And I think that that's the way to go. Definitely. Teresa says, the dream ended with me soaring above the countryside with my sister's spirit letting me know that she was no longer shackled, I guess that's here on earth, and was now free. Oh, see, that's beautiful. I absolutely love that. Teresa, I'm wondering, did you ask for that dream, or was that something that just happened? I think that's beautiful. What do you know about dreams, Sheryl? What are your thoughts on dreams?
I do think that that our deceased loved ones can communicate with us through dreams. I know when my grandmother died, not that we were that close, but we had lived together for 10 years at one stage, and we had a connection, and a strong energetic connection, because you can have positive and negative energetic connections. we had this pact, actually. I'll just back this up a little bit, that after she died, she would let me know that she was still existing on the other side, right? And then as she got older, I said, no, forget that. I don't want to know. I don't want to know. Anyway, but getting back to, but there was not more to that story, but getting back to your question, I say that so you know the background, is that she came to me in a dream. And it was when, now I'd never dreamed about my grandparents after they died, or when they were alive, actually. But she came to me in a dream after she died when she was 19 years old. And I'm looking at this person thinking, who is that? Who is that? You know, like, and I realized my memory, I remembered I had seen a photograph of her decades previously when she was 19. You know, you wouldn't know it was the same person.
Wow.
And she appeared to me as herself, as an 80-year-old, and then she grew younger and younger and younger, and then eventually showed me this image of herself when she was 19. Now, I don't know why that happened. If I was making that up myself, and I always leave room for that to happen, but I had no, you know, after she died, there was no, you know, longing to see her, or no mixed emotions, no huge grief, nothing like that. I just let it go. But she appeared like that to me. Now, she appeared in that as an older person, so I know who it was, but then she took me down to being when she was 19. And I've often wondered, why did that, if that was her communicating or her consciousness communicating, what was the point of that? Was she trying to educate me about some sort of process? Or maybe perhaps that on the other side, that was how she appeared, how she was now, or at that time, or a part of her life when she was 19 was very important. Should I dig around in that? I mean, I don't know. And I haven't sort of dug around in it. But, you know, it was very interesting, just out of the blue.
Yeah, that really is. Did you know that she was 19, or you just got a feel for she was around that age?
No, she told me many years ago. She was, you know, when I was much, much younger, like 40 years ago. And I was looking at the photograph album. Yeah.
Oh, wow. It's interesting because I have heard this as well, as people, when they're having a near-death experience, when they see past loved ones, they recognize them, but they don't look how they looked here because they're at the prime point of their life, like the best point where they felt the best, or they're more aligned with their purpose, or you know, it's hard to define what best actually is, but they'll come across at that prime point in their life of that was their ultimate best, and that's
Mm.
how they now are. They're living in that way on the other side. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting. I love that we hear all of these different parts of the conversation, because there are so many things that we don't even consider, things that
Mm.
happen, and then, you know, we question afterwards, why did it happen like that? Why did, you know, somebody told me a story about how one of their friends had died, and they saw their friend driving the car down the road, and they were like, can't believe that. How did that happen?
Mm.
And the next day, the same thing happened. And it turns out that the friend had died in that car in a car accident. So the car, it wasn't possible. It was the same number plate and everything. It was their car. But
Mm.
when they were driving the car, the guy was younger, had long curly hair. He looked really healthy and really young. But the age at which he died, he didn't look like that.
Mm.
So
Yes.
just it fascinates me. And then what happened in that story is he ended up waving at him, saying, "Okay, I acknowledge you. You know, that is you. Definitely, I'm seeing you, even though that's impossible in the physical." And then he never saw him again. It was happening every day at the same point. And then one day he waved, acknowledged, and then he never saw him again. So I've got
Mm.
goosebumps thinking about that. Okay, I'm going to jump back into these comments, which are really great. Okay, where are we? Teresa, you say more above that on the earlier part of the post above. I actually don't have an earlier part of your post, so I apologize if that's been lost in somewhere, cyberspace somewhere. If you want to put that back in, Teresa, you're very welcome to. I'm not sure where that has gone. Everly has brought up the parable of the sower in Matthew 13. I'm not quite sure which point of the conversation that's jumping into, but you're very welcome to expand on that. Alan says, I think dreams are more common because we are asleep. We don't have mental thoughts, beliefs, or other human filters that stand in the way of being able to communicate with us freely. I 100% agree with that. I think when we're asleep, we're in a different state of consciousness. And I think it opens us up to other opportunities. And yeah, what do you think, Cheryl?
Yeah, well, I think it puts us in a particular, shall we say, resonance. You know, there's a certain amount of hertz going through the brain. Brain hurts. Can't think of the word at the moment. Sorry.
My brain hurts.
Brain waves. And it switches over. And when that when the resonance changes over when we're asleep, I think we can tap into other realities or other dimensions, just like a radio, changing channels. You know, you can tune into the different frequencies. And I think what we can do like that is probably quite amazing. I mean, just in the physical form, we're healing when we're sleeping. You know, I mean, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But so when we're going in that sleep stage, I do think that we can open up to other realms and communication, not necessarily from deceased loved ones or friends, but, you know, maybe extraterrestrials too.
Yeah, okay, so let's have this conversation. I'm just going to hide your comment there, Alan. I like that comment a lot. I agree with it. Okay, so extraterrestrial visitations, UFO, let's call it what you want to call it. How common are these? I know you've had personal experience. Are you happy to share them? And yeah, how common do you think they are?
Yeah, sure. You just sort of dropped in and out a little bit then, so just missed some of that.
Sorry.
I think you were asking that I'd had an experience that I want to share, and how common are these?
Yeah, you've had your own personal experiences, haven't you?
Yeah, I have. I've had 7 UFO sightings. One was a daylight one only a couple of years ago over the house, with a couple of friends. One had a camera and videoed it and put it up on our YouTube channel. I've had another sighting. Actually, I think all of my sightings I've been with people, except one was my ex-husband who was driving one night, and I saw it out the window so he didn't see that. But probably the best one, like as in sighting, but I've also had a close encounter too, but I'll tell you about the sighting, was when it was in 1992. We were out at west of Brisbane at Wivenhoe Dan camping, and there was a large group of people. We had 3 people on roster during the night. Every 2 hours we changed shifts, and the guys who were on at 3 a.m, they came running. One of them came running down trying to wake up some people. He managed to wake up 8 people, and plus myself. Wow. And they had seen initially an orange light high up in the sky, and when they looked at it through binoculars, it was 3 distinct orange lights, and it was getting lower, 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 and lower and lower. So 8 of us were woken up. We got out of the tent. I grabbed the video camera, which was the old video camera. We actually had a video cassette in it in those days, which was working in the afternoon. But, you know, by that time it stopped working. Great. Anyway, which is so typical. So anyway, I'm running up over the slight crest of the hill to go to look where they were. And as you get on the top, you see the dam water. And just above the water, there were 3 orange lights, and they were low enough to be reflecting on the water, on the surface of the water. And at that distance, they were probably about, I mean, I've said various things, but 200 to 300 meters away from the water's edge. And we're all standing there watching them. And then all of a sudden one went out, like a light switch had gone off. Another one drifted off into the distance and just faded. They were completely silent. And another one went onto the other, because there was like an inlet, so went onto the land on the other side of the inlet and came down among the trees. Now, they would have been about, at that distance, they were probably about 1 meter in diameter and football-shaped, okay? So some of the guys got in the car, they raced around the other side to see if they could find anything on the ground, thinking maybe these are hoax devices, you know, the Chinese lanterns, whatever, which weren't that readily available in those days. So you were making your own with the garbage bags and the little little candle underneath. Anyway, they found nothing. No trees were burned, no marks, nothing on the ground. Anyway, the next morning they went back, same thing. They found nothing. So we have no clue what that was, but there are 8 of us who saw it. The other thing that I experienced was back around 1990, 91, before that, was I woke up in the early hours of the morning, and outside the bedroom window, there was a window, and then outside was the light, the street light, and I saw these 3 beings standing beside me next to the bed. Between the bed and the window was about 1 meter, and they're standing in that space, and I see them silhouetted by the street light. And I couldn't see their faces per se, but I have this memory of seeing their eyes. I'm not sure how to weigh that up yet, but anyway, they're short. They're about 3.5, somewhere between 3 and 4 feet tall. Put it that way, maybe 3.5 feet tall, 3 feet. Large heads, inverted pear-shaped heads, large eyes. They're quite emaciated, very skinny, and very elongated too. And they were just standing there. And I woke up to this. This is what I woke up to. I don't know why I woke up, but I woke up to see these 3 beings standing beside me in bed. And I was terrified, absolutely terrified. What the heck? So it was like you waking up and you see a large tiger or a lion just there staring at you. You know, what do? You don't move. You can't do anything, and just looking at you. Anyway, my ex-husband at the time was asleep in bed, and he had a lot of problems with insomnia, so I only had to breathe the wrong way, and he'd be awake. Well, he was just completely out to it, and that's quite typical of people who have close encounters where their partner is just out to it, and they're not normally like that. It almost, people have questioned whether they've sort of been affected by these ETs so that they're not involved in the experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, so I did what every good little girl does, and I pulled the sheet up over my head.
Of course you did. I would.
And I started spontaneously reciting the Lord's Prayer, which I didn't know I still knew, because I did it at learned it at Sunday school, and I, never went to church or anything. Anyway, so I started saying it under this sheet, and then I'm out to it. The next thing I know, it's morning, and I didn't remember anything until around middle of the day, just after lunch, and something triggered the memory, and I went, oh my God, that's right, that happened last night. What the heck was that? And that was that. And I didn't talk about it for about, I told myself it was a hallucination for about 15 years. And I didn't talk about it much at all initially. And even purely because I'm a UFO researcher as well. So I didn't want people to start thinking, how if you study something, you start to become that, or you start to have those experiences.
Yeah.
I forget what the academics call that, the scientists.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I didn't want to talk about that. So, but that was a real sense of malevolence as well about those beings, that's why I had, I could say it was the same sense I had when I had that distressing NDE, that same sense of malevolence. Now, I don't know why. They were standing there and I was frightened, as you would be with anyone there, but the malevolence was to my core. I felt that terror to my core. Now, you got to remember, I'm 5'7" or 172 centimeters for those people who are younger, and I'm not a weak woman. And in those days, I was particularly strong. And if I'd hear anything at night, I'd get up and go out to the kitchen and get a knife, and I'd be walking around the house like this. So I wasn't afraid of taking on an aggressor. So these little beings, I could have stood up and just knocked them over, but I didn't. That was the thing. I didn't. And I behaved oddly in my thinking. So, yeah, I don't know what that was about, but I only had that one particular close encounter.
Yeah, that sounds terrifying. I just want to relay something that Lonnie just said. He says that he would have done the same thing, putting the sheet over his head. I would have done the same thing. like I say, I don't want these scary things. You said that you had this experience. You put the sheet over your head. You started to recite the Lord's Prayer. Why the Lord's Prayer? Do you have any idea where that came from? Because it seems to be a go-to. I've talked to so many people who say that they, in a situation, they call on Jesus or they call on, I don't know, something, they recite a prayer, they tap into something along those lines from earlier in their life. It's
Good question. I thought I was just weird, and then over time, I have heard other people who've had those types of experiences, and they've done the same thing, pull the sheet up over their head, and they've prayed. Pulling the sheet up over their head is it's nonsensical. It's illogical. I know that.
Yeah.
Why did I do that? I was the whole thing was instinctual. It wasn't, there was no thought in there, right? So it was all spontaneous and instinctual. I don't know why the Lord's Prayer. Maybe it was the first thing that I ever thought or felt that in my childhood that could give me some sort of backup, because I didn't have a lot of that in my childhood, because I had a pretty emotionally rough childhood, which is another thing that comes up for people who report close encounters. They often have a difficult childhood. So, and I don't know how the two are related, whether, because people tend to be dissociative types too, who have these types of experiences. And that's purely, I think, because of, same with people who have NDEs, they leave their body. That's huge, extreme dissociation. It's a protective mechanism, and it's the same thing with people who have close encounters. So, and they practice it over and over again in their lives as children, so that it's easy for them to dissociate. And maybe that's why some people can more easily have these experiences rather than others. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that was my next question. Actually, was I was coming into, you had the sheet over your head, and then, do you remember anything? You said you woke up. You didn't remember. Do you think you stayed in your bed? And I'm going way out on a limb here, but I've read quite a few things about where people believe that they've been abducted in some way or they've gone somewhere, and the next memory is I saw them and then I woke up.
I have no memory of anything there. A lot of people have said to me, why don't you have some memory regression, I don't really want to. Not that I'm worried these days about what I might find out, but it's, I think that regression in some cases, particularly like with this sort of memory recall, can stir up things that don't need to be stirred up, because for your higher good. And I remember a UFO researcher, Bud Hopkins, many years ago speaking in Sydney, and he was saying he'd done regression for a lot of people, but he said basically, if your life's working and and everything's good, don't stir the pot, because it doesn't actually benefit a lot of people in some ways. Some people it does, and I do recommend digging around in that if you are struggling in life and you need some sort of resolution, okay? But if you don't feel that, then perhaps you can just leave that aside. Doesn't mean that you're denying it or anything like that, or you're denying the subject or the existence of these things. It just means that maybe that's not for your highest good at this time. I don't know. Everyone has to do what they feel is right for them.
Yeah, totally. And I think it all comes back to that, as well as centering ourselves and finding out what is right for us right now, rather than just going through the motions, going through the flow. Totally. Oh, I love it. Okay, I'm going to come back to some of these comments. Everly says, doubts the experience after she had it, doubts herself. So that was in reference to the parable of the sower in Matthew 13. That totally makes sense. When we doubt, did it really happen? And I think that's jumping on the back of Shera's comment about, can we trust that these experiences happen? So that's interesting. If you have any questions, please just pop them up here. We're going to keep chatting for a little bit, but you're very welcome to put your questions into the comments and we will address those. Sheryl, I've got, we've had some storms here today. I think my Wi-Fi hasn't been as good as normal. And at one point you said it was hard to hear my question. I was asking you, how common do you think these encounters are?
I think they're quite common. I think that now, which ones are you talking about? Anything? Any unusual, anomalous experiences?
I'm going down more of the extraterrestrial, the UFO
Oh,
sightings, things like that.
oh yeah, sure, yeah.
But yeah,
Sightings. Yes, yes. Sightings are. I don't know. I've asked people in various social situations, like, for example, I've done a lot of public speaking with library groups, and they have a end of the month social club, right? So anyone comes along who's not necessarily interested in UFOs, they just go there for the cup of tea and the bicky and to talk to other people as well. And they happen to have a guest speaker. So I've done a lot of those. And I've always asked people who in the room has had a UFO sighting, and we're talking average 30 odd people, right? And there's always about 3 people, 2 or 3 people who put up their hand and say, oh, I've had a UFO sighting. They'll say, who knows someone who says they've had a UFO sighting? More hands go up. And then is anyone here brave enough to say that they've had some sort of close encounter? Well, people are less likely to want to put their hands up for that in public, but they'll come up to me afterwards and they'll tell me that they've had an experience. And there's always a couple of those people. So that's the numbers that we're looking at, right? So so probably about, let's make it 10 in 100 to be conservative.
okay.
That the amount of that we're aware of that people report. So and
That's quite a few, though.
yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a huge amount. And at one stage there was a study done in 91 called the Roper. It was called the Roper Report when it was published, and they found that 2% of the population had anomalous experiences relating to these types of things. So. And if you extrapolate that out into a country, that's hundreds of thousands of people. So there's a lot of people out there having these experiences. A lot of people are sitting on them; they don't share them. And I mean, I have a lot of people. I'm saying a lot of people, but there are. It's just a lot of people who will ring up and they will say, particularly this last 18 months, while people have been locked up with the COVID restrictions. And things that have happened to them in the past, they'll ring up with these historical reports to say, oh, this happened, when I was a kid, and they might be 60 years old or something like that. And they'll tell me about their experiences, what happened in their childhood. And I find that amazing. And it also goes to show that these types of experiences rattle around inside of people throughout their life because they can't find any resolution for them, because they're still not in our culture. It hasn't been in our culture, put it that way, to accept that people actually see UFOs. Up until recently, you've been branded with as an idiot, basically, if you report seeing a UFO, or you must have been drinking, or you're on drugs,
exactly.
or, but that's changed just very recently with the Pentagon report coming out, where they have corroborated the Navy footage that was taken of these objects that they'd seen. So yeah, it's very interesting time at the moment.
Oh, it is. And I hear about more and more people saying that they've had these experiences all the time. Like it's not that it's common mainstream everyday stuff yet, but it's definitely starting to come up a whole lot more. So it's definitely changing. Do you think, I want to go back to the encounters that you're talking about. Are most of the encounters negative? I get the feeling that from what you've been saying, a lot of them are scary, frightening, they're negative experiences. Or are there a huge majority of positive encounters that people have?
There's both. What I can tell you is during the 1990s that we were receiving a lot of reports, thousands, because it was a very active decade, and we were receiving a lot of what we call alien abduction reports, and they were terrifying to people because they suddenly their will was being changed, and they being taken out of their homes, out of their cars when they were camping, those sorts of things, taken into spacecraft, having medical tests done on them, and which was quite intrusive in many cases, and people didn't like it. And I don't blame them. And they would be getting angry, and they'd be saying, "What's ASIO or the FBI doing about this?" This sort of thing. And of course, I couldn't answer that properly. But anyway, then around 2000, the public opinion started to change, and the types of reports started to change, because I always put it down to scientists started saying different things. They started saying, going from "we're alone in the universe" to, "oh, well, maybe there's life out there," to "yeah, there could be life out there," to, "well, it's highly likely that we are unlikely that we are alone in the universe, and we've never been alone." And now they've got this whole field of research about exoplanets. And saying that there are many planets out there that can have life on it, just like Earth. So, and as that's changed over a 20-year period, so have the types of reports have changed too. Now, I don't know whether the abduction type experiences have gone underground because the emotional climate and the receptivity has changed, or the actual types of experiences have changed. So all I know is that it has.
Yeah, hard to know, isn't it? Yeah. Wow. So I was on Google the other day. It was a little while ago. I ended up going down a rabbit hole where Google showed me a video, and I went on there, and then I was on YouTube, and then I was down a rabbit hole, and I came across all these videos of people sharing the most unusual experiences. One was a guy and his friend driving a car, and then they just suddenly were in this different town. It was like they'd gone back in time. Other people were talking about how they'd lost hours. There was missing time. Is this quite a common thing? Because there were so many videos, and I found it so interesting, so fascinating. I had to pull myself out of it. But is this like a common thing that happens?
Yeah, missing time is quite common in relation to alien abduction experiences. Let's just call them that for now. And gained time. People can gain time. They go, "How did I get from here to there? And it only took me 10 minutes? What's that about?" How did that happen? And I just recently had, we hadn't had a missing time experience report for quite a while until just recently. It was in May, and a woman was driving north on the highway north of Brisbane with her son, who was an adult, and his friend in the car. And they were driving up past... doesn't really matter where, but up where the Steve Irwin Crocodile Park is, north of Brisbane. And then they drove from, so they knew that marker. Then they were driving, and they went to they thought that they knew to expect another turn off to go to their destination, and they realised they'd gone past it. So they had about 30 minutes of missing time, and they couldn't figure out how they had gotten from here to there, because it should have only taken a certain amount of time, and it took an extra 30 minutes. And they had to find a way to turn around and come back. And the whole three of them had witnessed that, and they have no clue how that happened. And there was no gap in memory,
Yeah, that's it. I can understand if we fall asleep, then we might lose time or something like that. I've literally got goosebumps right now thinking about this. But it's quite a common thing. I haven't heard of gaining time. That's a new one for me. It sounds quite amazing in a way. I know it would be scary. I know that we all want more time, but what are some of the more, what are some of the more common experiences, or I don't know, when we say these types of things, for people like me who haven't delved too deep into encounters or things like that, what are some of the stories that might actually blow our minds? What do we need to know?
Well, how long are we on?
I know, that's it. We've been going we've just clicked over an hour, so we'll start to wrap up soon. So final call for questions. There's a couple there, but yeah.
Well, people, just very quickly, there was one case back in 96. It was down the Gold Coast here, and a gentleman was outside having a cigarette with another man, and they saw this object come in really close, about 50 meters from the water, above the water, and 100 meters from them, or vice versa, I can't remember now, and it hovered there. It was large and dark, and it was faceted like a gem, and it hung there for a while, and they were looking at it, observing it for a while, and then it took off. And as it took off, it flew through the multi-story building near it. And he said that thing just cut through that like butter. So we have those types of reports. So we know that their physics is way beyond our physics, way beyond. The other types of things that people will report are they know where we live. Right? They seem to be able to know. And a case that is an example of that was a woman who was working in a call center. She was driving home in the early hours of the morning. It was about 2 a.m., I think. She saw this object off in the distance. It came down close, close, close. And it seemed to disappear. But then the next thing she knows, it's right beside her car. And she said, I could have put my arm outside the window and touched it. It was that close. And it was the length of the car. It was sleek. It was silver. There were no rivets or bolts or anything like that. It had a light out of the back. It was hovering off the ground. She pulled up at traffic lights and it took off. The lights changed to green. She drove on. She got to the top of her street and the object is hovering over her neighbour's garage. So she was very frightened because she'd pulled up at her driveway by now and she didn't want to get out of the car to go into her house. But she eventually got the nerve to do it, got inside, and then the object came and hovered over her yard. So it knew where she lived. And all this time, the little dog, the neighbour's little dog, was barking at the object, which hung over her backyard for an hour. It's lit up like daylight at one stage. She was on the phone to us, giving us a blow-by-blow description, and it took off. Next day, she discovered that about 30 centimetres or a foot of water had disappeared from her pool. The little dog that had been yapping at it over a month lost all its hair and it died. And a huge mango tree that was in the backyard, it died off as well too. So there were these effects on the surroundings from this object. That's just a couple of cases. So
that is terrifying stuff, isn't it? That is really scary stuff. When you talked about the UFO going through the building, my brain immediately jumped to, do you think it's an example, potentially, these UFO things of parallel lifetimes, parallel universes where somehow there's a bit of an overlap and, I don't know, something's not quite lined up right, or it's very hard to actually explain what I'm trying to say.
I don't know how they do it, is the bottom line.
It's the safe answer, right?
Yeah. They do it. It's not the first time I've heard it. I mean, they've been seen going into mountains like the Glasshouse Mountains north of Brisbane, just entering the earth, no crash, no boom, entering the water, no splash, rising out of the water, no, not too much turbulence or anything like that. Yeah, they seem to be able to manipulate space and matter in ways that we are yet to discover for ourselves, I suppose. But I did wonder about that one that went through the building, if there were actually people in there at the time, which there would have been, probably. And, did they have effects? What happened to them?
Yeah, I mean, even like, did their computers go down? Did they feel it? Was it like a shadow? So many thoughts, but nothing ever came out that you know of?
No.
No report? Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I can't budge that thing about a parallel lifetime happening at the same time. There's some sort of crossover or something. You mentioned very briefly, this is my last question, then I'm going to go to the viewers' questions and then we'll wrap up. My very last question is, I want to come back to, you said something about when there are encounters or when people get abducted, things like that there's often medical procedures that happen.
Yeah.
Why is that? Because I've heard of that a lot as well. What do you think's going on?
We think it has something to do with human DNA and genetics. These reports, these encounters are often reported in a family line. And so, the grandparents, the parents, the adult, their children, they often report these types of experiences in the family. And it makes sense if you're conducting some sort of experiments on DNA and looking at the evolution of it from, generation to generation or what's happening. And, if you've got 4 generations alive, you can be covering nearly 100 years. So that's a good timeline, amount of time to check on things. There could be that. The interesting thing for me and my interest is how the afterlife connects with the UFO subject. And if I've just got time briefly, because you've got to wrap up and I do have to go too, but is that there was a woman who I was holding an event and about near-death experiences, and this is also back in the 90s when around the time when Dr. Ken Ring was here. I was hosting him, and she told me of an experience she had where I might have said this in the previous interview that we've done, where her little girl had died. She'd been to the funeral. She came home. She was very distraught, lay down on the bed, and she could feel her heart rate getting lower and lower and lower, slower, much like mine was when I had this experience. Next thing she knows, she's out of her body. She's walking along a windy path with the soul of her little girl holding her hand. Gets to the point of no return where there's a spirit being. Spirit being says, "You can't come past here, but I'll take your daughter from here on. I'll look after her." So she hands her over. She walks back along the path, and here's a UFO on the side of the path. A classic spherical shaped UFO, disc-shaped UFO. She somehow goes finds herself inside the UFO. She's laying down on some sort of a table, and there are these extraterrestrials around her performing some sort of examination on her non-physical self. Then she's released. She gets up, she's released, she goes back down the path and wakes up in her bedroom. Now, I have no idea what that is. No idea. I do believe that she had that experience. I believe the woman that she, what she said, that she believes she had the experience too. And I know those types of experiences happen, but together I'm very curious how they match. And there's been quite a bit, but there is a few people like myself talking about the connection between the UFO phenomenon and the evolution of the human soul. And that's for another discussion. But basically, and I've got other reports, similar sorts of things too, so which we don't have time to go into. But it's a very big story. I do think that the afterlife is much, much bigger than what we think it is, and so is the UFO phenomenon. And until we sort of open those doors and go exploring, we won't get the whole story.
Yeah, there is so much in there, isn't there? I think it is potentially quite huge as well. I'm almost nervous to start dabbling in that because, it seems like it might go on for some time. Okay, so we're just jumping over here. So Miriam has a question. She says, "Hi, Sheryl, did you get interested in UFO research because of a sighting or just out of curiosity?"
Miriam, I got interested because I was doing a Bible study course at the time. It was for 3 years. Every week I'd meet with a couple of people and we'd be studying the scriptures. And I was reading them and I was starting to think in my modern mind that these experiences of angelic visitation were more like descriptions of close encounter experiences that I'd been reading about today. And, people being paralyzed and falling to the ground and then seeing these bright lights and these beings that would glow. And I thought, this sounds like aliens to me. It doesn't sound like angels at all. It makes, it was more grounded and more sensible to me, wanting to have that evidence, remember that, it just sounded more realistic that these were extraterrestrials. And that's how I got started.
Wow, that's so interesting. Yeah, and again, I've never considered them in that light. So interesting. Thank you, Sheryl. Okay, Teresa says she has a series of dreams before and after the death of a sibling. So this is going back with the one where she was above and she was with her sister. So I'm sorry, Teresa, that's got messed up. It's probably my Wi-Fi, actually. The story progressed and ended with her soaring with her spirit after death. Is this common? It was her first experience.
Yeah, I've heard people reporting something similar, And it is interesting. It's almost like a shared death experience, except it's in a dream, isn't it? And I guess that would be the closest that I would relate to with the shared death experiences. And I think that's possible in dreams too, that we can be with our loved ones for a certain amount of time as they're going on to where they need to go, but then we come back. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I love those shared death experiences because a lot of people say, well, it's just the mind playing tricks. It's, the operating theatre lights with the tunnel and things like that. But when you have a shared death experience, the other person's completely healthy. They're not going through that same experience. So I hope that helps, Teresa. Yeah, I think it is fairly common personally, but best to have a little look into that. Okay, Everly says, I was there more than 5 months, yet I'd been told I'd been gone less than a minute. A day is as 1,000 years. So I think that's in reference to the time, losing time, gaining time. Very interesting. Okay, we are coming around. We have got, Lonnie says, the time period around the Silver Bridge collapse, Mothman. Besides Mothman sightings, there were UFO sightings as well. My mother drove to a town and all the vehicles stopped for a few moments. It was weird for sure.
Yeah. I've heard that too.
Yeah, it comes up quite a bit, that Mothman thing, doesn't it? So,
well, I've heard of vehicles just stopping for a moment or just freezing. Yeah,
exactly. So ET's examining a soul. Never heard of that. Fascinating. I know. I've never heard of that too. Like I'm there. I've got a very visual mind, so I'm imagining it all taking place. But then when you said they were examining her soul, I was like, hang on a minute. How do I imagine that? Is it out of body? How does that work? So very, very interesting.
Yeah. And why bother putting that person into that scenario? Yeah,
exactly.
Scenario. They probably didn't need to. I don't know. Maybe they did. Who knows?
Who knows? And maybe it happens more commonly than we think, but we think we're dreaming, or maybe an out-of-body experience might lead to something like that. Who knows? Miriam says, interesting for sure. Sure is. Okay, Teresa, wondering if it was a shared death experience as well. So that's really good. Yes, go and have a research of some of those. I think they're very, very fascinating. And yeah, who knows? It may quite well have been. Teresa says, thank you. Okay, Alan says, are there reports of people encountering aliens when there is no spaceship seen?
Definitely.
Good question.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, they can appear in someone's room. I had a woman call me and told me that she woke up one night to see these two small aliens, which are we call the greys, small ones, and they were opening her wardrobe and going through her drawers. And she thought,
oh, wow.
And then they realized she was awake and they stopped, and then they just disappeared, just like that. Yeah.
And what happened with her clothes and her drawers and things?
Well, they were just all pulled out, like they were throwing them out and looking. Yeah.
But it just stayed all messy. It didn't suddenly tidy it. Because you couldn't go, did I imagine that, when there's stuff all over the floor or everything's pulled out? Yeah.
I've got so many stories I could tell, but we don't have the time.
I think we're going to have to get you back, Sheryl, because I feel like we're just warming up. I feel like this is a little bit outside what we normally talk about. People are just starting to warm up. I'm starting to get, I've always got questions. We may need to get you back to do that. So that is actually the end of our questions, which is fabulous. Sheryl, thank you so much. You bring so much experience and knowledge, and I know you're doing some amazing things now, and you've got your healing practice. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about what you're doing now and where people can find you? Where's the best place to find you?
Well, actually, right now I'm focusing on our UFO organisation fully and totally. So my Body Light Centre has just sort of gone on hold for about 6 months. And I'm still posting on the Afterlife Discussions Facebook page, so you can find us there. You can also go to our YouTube channel and you can see past presentations. I put that on hold for 6 months too. But purely for what's going on in the UFO field at the moment, it just requires all of my attention, and I'm involved with an international online group now called ISO, which is the International Coalition for Extraterrestrial Research, involving 29 representatives from 29 different countries. So,
wow.
So that's hoping to take the UFO subject to the United Nations eventually. So, yeah, so totally involved in that for the moment.
Yeah, that's fascinating. We'll put some links, I think, into the video. So I won't put it as a comment here, but I'll put the link into the actual YouTube video and on Facebook so people can follow up on that. Interesting. So the Afterlife Discussions group, is that still active, or is it more just that you're posting things that you find
No,
or research that you're doing?
I've just put the meetings on hold for the moment for 6 months.
Okay.
But I'll be picking it up again next year, as well as running a UFO group as too. So, yeah.
Oh, it is fabulous. Sheryl Gottschall, thank you so much. This has been you've blown my mind. I've got so many things here to go and think about, and I've still got that list of YouTube videos that I went down that rabbit hole and watched, and you've answered some of the questions. You've helped me to connect some of the dots through that today. So very, very interesting. We've got a couple of people here saying thank you and that it was interesting. So that is wonderful. We value your time. We appreciate that you've given us so much today. So Sheryl Gottschall, thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. It was my pleasure.
That is wonderful. If you want to say your thanks to Sheryl, you're welcome to jump on in and leave a little comment there. We will be back. We have another live session next week. Don't forget, if you want the updates for the email updates, just to let me know, you can email me, Kirsty at letstalkneardeath.com, to get your email onto there, or sign up on the sign up link, which is in the YouTube video listings. We wish you a fabulous day and look forward to chatting with you again soon. Take care.